She stood in the kitchen, gripping her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, but her mind was louder than any storm. She had just come out of yet another argument with someone she loved, someone who used to bring laughter and comfort into her world. Now every word felt like a blade, and as she stared at the chipped edge of the counter, a thought whispered in her spirit, not from her own voice, but deeper, stiller, unmistakably divine. It's time to let go. But how do you let go of someone who's still breathing, still texting you, still sitting across the table every morning? How do you walk away when the world keeps telling you that love means staying, no matter the cost? She didn't want to be bitter. She didn't want to act out of pain. So she did what she always did when life didn't make sense. She prayed. And in the silence that followed, she realized something had been missing for a long time. Peace. That quiet certainty, that inner stillness that used to be there, had vanished. She tried to remember the last time she felt safe in that relationship. Really safe. Not just familiar, not just used to the routine, but genuinely at peace. And the truth hit her like a flood. It had been months, maybe even years. There's a kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from the realization that something you've been clinging to has been quietly slipping through your fingers all along. That grief has no funeral, no goodbyes, no flowers, just silence. And in that silence, God often speaks, not with thunder or flashes of light, but with a holy absence, a subtle lifting of peace that signals, "My child, this is not where you are meant to stay." The Bible gives us glimpses of this divine separation. Abraham and Lot had walked a long road together. They were family. Their lives were intertwined, their blessings abundant. But when strife broke out among their people, Abraham did something remarkable. He didn't fight to hold it all together. He trusted God more than the relationship. He looked at Lot and said, "You choose. Wherever you go, I'll go the other way." It wasn't cold. It wasn't rejection. It was surrender. And only after Lot left, only after the separation, did God reveal to Abraham the full scope of his promise. Sometimes God waits to speak until the noise of wrong attachments fades. We often think that letting go is failure, that if we release someone, we've given up on love or mercy or commitment. But what if, in God's eyes, letting go is actually obedience? What if it's faith in action, believing that His plan is better, even when it feels like heartbreak? That's not weakness. That's spiritual maturity. But here's the thing. You can't always discern with your eyes. People might still smile, still say the right things, still show up. But your spirit knows. Peace is the compass. And when it disappears, it's time to pause and pay attention. She remembered how, at first, she blamed herself. Maybe she was too sensitive, too emotional, too critical. She'd wake up with knots in her stomach, replaying conversations, second-guessing everything. She'd try to pray the discomfort away, begging God to restore what was broken. But the more she prayed, the clearer the unrest became. It wasn't hers to fix. It wasn't hers to carry. What she thought was her battle was actually God's boundary. Peace is not just a feeling. It's one of the purest expressions of God's presence. Scripture calls Jesus the Prince of Peace. So when peace is gone, it's not just a sign of emotional imbalance. It's often a signal of spiritual misalignment. When someone repeatedly leaves you anxious, confused, or heavy, it might not be because you're flawed or lacking grace. It might be because God is showing you, gently but firmly, that you are out of sync with the place or the person you're trying to force into your life. Letting go doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's not walking out the door, but stepping back in your heart. It's choosing silence over constant explaining. It's choosing boundaries over guilt. It's choosing to honor God's whispers over your own wishes. That's hard. But growth is rarely comfortable, and obedience is rarely convenient. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. The moment she stopped chasing peace in that relationship and started chasing the presence of God, everything shifted. Her heart didn't heal overnight. There were still moments of ache, of missing what used to be. But in that sacred space of release, God began to restore her. Not just by taking someone away, but by filling her with himself. There are people who come into our lives for a reason, and others only for a season. And when a season ends, no amount of pleading can make it eternal. We serve a God of times and seasons, of beginnings and endings. He's not just the Alpha, but the Omega too. And sometimes his greatest protection is hidden in the people he gently removes. Not to punish, but to preserve. Not to deprive, but to prepare. So if you've been waking up without peace, if your prayers feel strained and your spirit is restless, it may not be that you're broken. It may be that God is breaking the attachment that's been holding you back. Trust him. He sees what you can't. He knows what lies ahead. And sometimes his no in the form of separation is really a louder yes to your purpose, your healing, your freedom. He thought she was the one. She had a smile that could melt away tension in a room, eyes that sparkled when she talked about dreams, and a voice that made him feel known. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Their photos were framed on his desk, their conversations full of shared plans and promises. He even thought about proposing, but what he didn't realize was that slowly, and almost invisibly, he had started shrinking. The fire in his faith began to flicker. The time he used to spend in prayer was replaced by anxious texting. Church became optional. His journal sat unopened. The man who once woke up early to read the word now woke up hoping he hadn't disappointed her again. And one evening, as he walked out of a Bible study alone, because she convinced him it wasn't worth going to, he heard the still, small voice of God say, "What you're calling love is costing you your calling." Stunned him. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept turning over the question in his mind. How could something that felt so emotionally right be spiritually wrong? But then he began to trace the pattern. Every time he'd feel drawn to God, something would interrupt it. Every time he felt stirred to serve, there'd be a subtle comment that pulled him back. When he'd speak about his dreams of ministry, of serving youth, of building something that glorified God, she'd smile politely but never lean in. It was like he was walking with someone who admired the idea of him but didn't share the burden of his purpose. And slowly, his soul began to ache. Not every distraction comes dressed in evil. Some come disguised as good, safe, familiar, even loving. But not every person in your life is meant to carry your calling. Some only admire the surface of who you are, not the depth of who God created you to become. That's why discernment is vital. The enemy doesn't need to destroy you outright. He only needs to detour you long enough that you forget why you started. You stop showing up. You stop listening for God. You lose sight of the thing he set ablaze in your heart. And all the while, the people around you might still be smiling, still saying they care, even holding your hand. But your purpose is suffocating in silence. God is not cruel when he removes someone who's dimming your light. He's merciful. He knows how heavy it is to carry someone who won't carry the vision with you. He knows how painful it is to try to explain divine assignments to someone who doesn't believe in them. He sees how alone you feel even when someone is sitting right next to you. And he loves you too much to let your destiny die in the name of keeping someone who was only meant to walk part of the journey. There's a sacred responsibility that comes with purpose. It demands alignment. You can't build a life centered on God with someone who's centered on themselves. You can't chase heaven while being tethered to someone who's still fascinated by the world. And the longer you stay tied to a person who isn't called to where you're going, the more tension you'll feel between your spirit and your surroundings. Your dreams begin to feel like burdens. Your convictions feel like inconveniences. And slowly, without realizing it, you start editing your obedience to keep the peace. But obedience isn't supposed to be edited. It's supposed to be lived out in full. And sometimes, the only way to obey is to let go of what's hindering you, even if that thing has a heartbeat and a history with you. God's not asking you to be cold. He's asking you to be courageous, to choose your calling over your comfort, to believe that he knows what kind of love will grow your purpose, not choke it, that the person who truly belongs in your life will not be threatened by your fire, but will help you fan it into a greater flame. He finally sat her down and told her the truth, not out of anger, but with clarity. "I love you," he said, "but I'm starting to lose myself in trying to hold this together. I believe God is calling me to something bigger, and I need space to hear him clearly again." Her silence was heavy, her eyes confused. But in that moment, something lifted. Not just the burden, but the fog. For the first time in months, he felt the presence of peace. It didn't make the heartbreak easier, but it made the decision clear. Because anything that costs you your peace is too expensive. And anything that costs you your purpose is not from God. We often stay too long in places that feel safe, even when they're spiritually stagnant. But God is not in the business of comfort. He's in the business of calling. And your calling will stretch you. It will demand that you prune relationships that no longer bear fruit. It will ask that you walk away from people who might be good but are not good for where God is leading you. And that pruning is painful, but it's necessary. Because the only thing worse than letting go is waking up one day and realizing you've spent years becoming someone God never asked you to be. Your purpose is too valuable. Your voice, your influence, your anointing, it's not accidental. It was given to you for such a time as this. So guard it. Protect the soil it grows in. Be mindful of the people you allow into that sacred space. If someone constantly distracts you from your faith, makes you question your convictions, or draws you away from the presence of God, then no matter how much history you share, they are not meant for your destiny. You were made for more, and sometimes more begins with less. Less noise, less compromise, less explaining, more silence, more presence, more room for God. Trust that when He removes someone, it's not rejection, it's redirection. And even if it hurts now, it's only making space for something more aligned, more fruitful, more divine. She tried everything. She sent the messages, made the calls, rearranged her schedule to make time, swallowed her pride to reach out first, again and again. But every time it felt like something stood in the way. Either it was a change in plans, a cold response, or some invisible wall that she couldn't name but could feel. She kept telling herself it was just a season, that it would pass. But with each attempt to reconnect, it was as if the universe kept quietly saying, "Stop trying." It wasn't loud, not dramatic, not cruel. Just this constant stream of closed doors, missed chances, and that sinking feeling in her chest that something sacred had shifted. And when she finally got still enough to listen, really listen, she realized it wasn't just life being complicated. It was God gently, firmly, lovingly closing a door she didn't have the strength to close on her own. Sometimes God does that. Sometimes He steps in when we're too entangled, too hopeful, or too scared to do what needs to be done. He interrupts what we thought would last forever because He sees what we can't. He knows the chapters ahead, the people He's preparing, the things He needs to protect us from. And while we beg for reconnection, He's orchestrating separation. Not to harm us, but to hold us. Not to punish, but to preserve. It's a truth we don't always want to admit. Not every disconnection is a tragedy. Some are divine. Because God isn't just the author of relationships, He's the editor too. And sometimes He edits people out of your story not because they're evil, but because their part in your journey is complete. When you cling to someone whose role has expired, you don't just stall your growth, you risk spiritual suffocation. God will never call you to remain attached to something that hinders your alignment with Him. She remembered the friend she used to talk to every day. They'd laugh for hours, dream about the future, pray together. But over time, the conversations changed. What once felt mutual became one-sided. Encouragement turned into sarcasm. Faith became a topic too heavy for them. And she fought hard to keep the connection alive. But it wasn't working. No matter what she did, the space between them kept growing. She asked God why it hurt so much to lose something she never wanted to lose. And the answer came not in words, but in peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you stop fighting what God is undoing. There's something sacred about learning to release. We live in a culture that glorifies chasing, fixing, forcing. We're told that if we try hard enough, love hard enough, fight hard enough, we can make anything work. But in the kingdom of God, surrender is sometimes the highest form of strength. Not everything broken needs to be repaired. Some things need to be relinquished. And when we release, we make room. For healing. For clarity. For newness. God never subtracts without the intention to add something more eternal, more fruitful, more aligned with His will for our lives. But it's hard to see that when you're in the middle of grief. The grief of what could have been, what once was, what you hoped would last. That grief is real. God sees it. He doesn't rush us through it. He sits with us in it. But even in our sorrow, He is still sovereign. And when He removes, He also redeems. The doors He closes are never empty exits. They are holy thresholds to places we wouldn't have dared to walk on our own. You don't always know it in the moment, but every unanswered message, every canceled plan, every slow fade might be God's gentle way of shielding you. Not because the person is your enemy, but because they're no longer part of your assignment. And your heart might ache, but your spirit will breathe again. The weight of forcing what's no longer right will always be heavier than the weight of letting go. Trust is hard, especially when God's plan doesn't make sense. But trust is where freedom begins. And freedom is where your next chapter starts. When life keeps pulling you apart from someone, don't be so quick to assume it's just coincidence or bad timing. Sometimes it's divine timing. God knows when a connection is keeping you in circles, delaying your healing, clouding your judgment. And He loves you too much to let you stay stuck. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't love. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're honoring what God is doing even when your emotions don't agree yet. It means you're choosing obedience over attachment, trust over control, purpose over comfort. It means you're stepping aside so that God can step in. She didn't hate the people who walked away. She didn't curse the seasons that ended. She just finally understood that some exits are sacred. And when God writes the end on a page, it's only because He's ready to begin a new one. So if you've been wondering why nothing works anymore, why everything feels forced, why the conversations don't flow and the connection doesn't land, pause. Listen, maybe you're not being rejected. Maybe you're being rerouted. And even though it stings now, the peace that's coming will be worth every tear. The same God who removes is the God who restores. The same God who shuts doors is the God who opens better ones. And the same God who asks you to walk away is already standing at the next place, arms open, heart ready, waiting to give you what only comes after you let go.